Have a quorum here, so we are gonna call this meeting to order of the Joint Board Coalition Communities 2.0. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. We can see everybody and communicate with everyone. I'm going to dispense with the formality of doing a roll call. The entire Joint Board is here, quorum in person, and Joy via video. First item of business is to review the minutes. We have received a copy in advance from Jim.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Second.
Okay. Now
Before you
motion
vote?
and a second.
Before you vote,
Yep, comments?
just small correction. I'm from Newington or represent Newington, not Newmarket.
Okay. Yep, I see that.
I'm sure that might be help. Then Dr.
I
Sean
know
Ford.
it's new, but
Okay, okay to make that an amendment?
Yeah.
All right, good. So I'll take any other comments on the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor, we'll start with Joy. Motley. Aye. Bill?
Aye. Aye. Aye.
And I'm an aye, so those have passed. The next thing is legislative update. Turn it over to Jim.
Great. Well, good to be with you all. Happy New Year. And I'm here on my own today. Both Kathy and Teresa are at the State House covering various meetings because it is that time of year. I was mentioning before we started that in talking to legislators, we know, just as one example, the House Education Committee has over 100 bills this session they're dealing with. The state Senate last week held 78 public hearings. So it's been a very aggressive early start to deal with the nearly 1,000 bills that they've undertaken this year. So what you have in front of you, and this is what was sent out on Friday, was kind of the post-holiday update of where we are from a bill standpoint, bills that we've captured and that we're actively tracking. As Mark noted, one of his representatives said there was a lot of activity on the education front in the legislature this year, and that is true. That is true. However, a lot of that, a lot of those bills have to do with topics that are more tangential to what our concern is, particularly on education freedom accounts, which there are a great number of bills on this year. A lot of Democrats are looking to constrain that program and are fighting actively on that front with Republicans. So what we've been told and what we reported in December was that school funding issues were generally not on anyone's real appetite to deal with this session. We know that one of the bills that we were following was interim study unanimously by a bipartisan vote, which was approved in the first session of the year. And so we're obviously tracking these bills because we know that amendments can be brought forward that may impact them in a way that touches and concerns us. But right now, there is a lot of activity. There's a lot of tracking going on, but there aren't a lot of things that are necessarily directly germane. We did talk about Representative Umberger's ongoing study committee on adequacy. They had a few meetings in the fall. We just found out today they're not going to meet again until after crossover, which is on March 31st. That, of course, is when the House has to have all of its business on House bills done, the Senate on its bills. They've got to then cross over to the various bodies. But as we've seen, at least so far, they've been largely focused on the school lunch issues. But obviously, we'll see how that evolves over the next few months. So for early April, for them to kind of reconvene on that front. I do want to, and this is a conversation was had here a few moments ago about bills. The other bills that we're tracking have to do with this body and how we can meet. Obviously, we're meeting physically and in person right now. There are efforts underway to alleviate some of those requirements and maybe make a physical quorum less difficult to attain and go back to some of the emergency order world we had in 2020. So those are bills we're following. It's unclear yet how much support they're going to get broadly. Leadership hasn't really weighed in yet. The three topics that are of most concern to the legislature this year, by volume of bills and by the volume of the fights that are underway. One is on education on these other issues. One is very broadly on vaccines and mandates, emergency powers. And then one is on reproductive rights, given what's happening at the federal level. That's where an awful lot of energy is being absorbed right now. So what I was hoping, we could, with the bills that we have here, any in particular that as we go through that jump out at you as ones of particular concern, in addition to ones that are the obvious ones, I'd like to make sure that we're giving particular attention to, but that is where we are right now.
Okay, we'll go down through these. If there are any bills that anyone has a question on, we'll go down the spreadsheet and see if rather deal with it rather than review every single one of them. If you have a question,
Right.
Let's ask them.
Before we do that,
Oh, go ahead.
so it's rather apparent to me, you already said it. There is nothing that fits within the charter that we have for this group that's really going to be germane. We don't have anything that, no inkling that we're going to be returning to the donor town. There's none of these bills are even close to that, what I've seen.
Right.
So it looks like for this legislative session, the threat is pretty low.
I think with all the caveats appropriate for that, I think that's true. We do know, and we can talk about this when we maybe get to the communication section, the School Fairness Project, the Funding Fairness Project is having their series of roundtable meetings. They were in Newport the other day. They're in Nashua on Wednesday. My sense is they're building a long-term game here to message and to get into the election cycle and hopefully get a different legislature they can work with. So I think, Sean, that's an accurate statement. But I do know that there are legislators who would certainly care about the stuff, that if they had the opportunity, they would do it. And where we are seeing, and the legislature right now, the House right now is meeting at the Expo Center in Manchester, Center of New Hampshire, Manchester, and turnout on these bills is critical. And there are a lot of people that are not attending. And so we're seeing votes on bills that are maybe a little bit different than they would have been had you had a normal turnout due to COVID. So I think that's accurate. Just one of those trust but verify type of things over the next few months.
So for us, it's a long game.
Sorry, this is Jane. Is everything being held at the Expo Center for the House, the committee meetings, or just the votes on, the full House?
Yeah, it's just the legislative sessions, Jane. They are having committee meetings here at the State House.
Okay.
They're just trying to do it in a spaced fashion where they can.
Mhm.
But yes, they are trying out the Expo Center for the sessions as their new venue. I'm not sure why they moved from the Bedford Sportsplex, because frankly, that's a larger space than the Expo Center.
Thank you.
The Senate is meeting at the State House, however, just so you're aware.
Okay.
I had
So-
one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is Paul. Is there you alluded to in one of your emails on House Bill 608, and it was just tabled. Is there more backstory to that we should be aware of instead of it being ITL'd? Or why was it tabled rather than other actions?
I'll have to go back and look for you on that, but I will tell you, Paul, that they did that with a lot of bills. It wasn't simply 608. They tabled a number of bills in mass. I will follow up with you. I've got my notes somewhere on that, but it was not uniquely a 608 issue. I can tell you that.
It's just, as one can infer, it once it's on the table, it can always be picked up from the table and resurrected in its own fashion. So that seems to be the only bill in the list that is directly on point. And if it stays on the table, great.
Right. Right, and hard to bring them off absent some kind of unique bipartisan coalition here, but I'll get an answer for that for everybody, and I will share that out.
But to that point, 608 is left over from last year. And they had a timeline to act on those.
Right.
So doesn't that kill that one? That doesn't go through the rest of the legislative session.
Right, it's effectively, yeah, it's effectively killed. They could always suspend rules, but again, you're talking about 2/3 majorities here that are highly unlikely to do that. So it is effectively dead. But that's not to say they couldn't, if someone again wanted to grab an aspect of it and work it into another bill, they always could, which is why we'll watch, but that's effective, correct.
So on those amendments, they don't have to be germane to the bill that they're getting added to, do they?
Like the
Or-
budget.
Well, like the budget.
Right, they have flexibility to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've seen that a little more, in kind of the COVID legislating era with, these omnibus bills that have come together,
Right,
which was
right.
really unique. So, yeah. But if I can ask, to your
Sure.
point about, and Sean's point about the bills that, are kind of part of the charter. How do you, or do you want to attack or deal with any of these bills that might affect how this body can meet? Is there any stomach or interest in expressing a position, or should we simply just maintain kind of a monitoring posture?
I personally would like to see the rules changed, but I think as a group, we should stay away from it.
But that's the problem. We talked about this initially because we have conservative and liberal communities and the mindset's different. And the motives for the position that we have is slightly different.
Right.
My community would love to have an income tax, whereas the other communities, I guess, probably not want that. They definitely don't want the property tax, education property tax. So that we all agree on. But once we start to drift off of that, I think there's the risk of fracturing the coalition.
Okay.
But I do think it's important to monitor those bills
Sure.
because it impacts how we do business. So
Right.
just keeping abreast of it
Okay,
from that standpoint is enough.
understood, and that's what we're doing. So we'll continue to do that because it could conceivably impact us here. And there is some stomach to do something this session. We'll see if they get through it or not.
Like 1033 in particular.
Yeah, that's the one I was gonna raise, because
Yeah.
we wouldn't have you, Jim, if that one
Right.
passed, so that would be bad.
Well, and it's your point, and exactly, and so that's another one that we are watching because it would obviously impact business of how the committee functions, so.
So we have agreed upon hiring a lobbying firm. So this directly flies in the face of that.
Right.
So I don't have a problem with us advocating in opposition to 1033.
Absolutely.
It's tomorrow, isn't it?
Yes,
Aye.
it is.
Public hearing tomorrow,
Yes.
9:30.
So do you want a motion to that effect?
I think we should be on the record, yes.
I make a motion that we have Bernstein Insure advocate in opposition to House Bill 1033. And
I'll
any
sec-
derivation thereof.
Joy, you second?
I did.
Okay, so I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Joy, your vote? Phil?
Yes.
Sean?
Yes.
Yes.
And Mark is a yes, so it's 5-0.
And this is the initial hearing, so we'll have opportunities going forward here, but we'll certainly make sure that we get on record with that for tomorrow's hearing. And then now that I know we're postured in that way towards it, we can take a little more affirmative action with regard to it.
Is that included in HMA?
Does.
Yeah.
So I hope we're,
This comes up every year.
yeah,
And we will report back who else
Okay.
signed in opposition,
Yeah.
and I have a feeling this is one of those that is sort of hornet's nest that the legislators may choose to quickly pass on and avoid, but we'll get a sense and we'll
Okay.
report back.
right.
My suggestion is too, you can sign in opposition to this.
Yeah.
Individually. I did
Can
it
you
this
still
morning.
do it online?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll do it.
And HMA sent out a notice to all the municipalities, it was yesterday, this morning, to do just that.
Jim, for signing in, I've done it now a couple times and kind of figured out the new website, which actually is easier in some respects. But when can you sign in advance of a hearing? I remember during COVID getting locked out, if I waited too long. Do you have to sign in if you're not testifying your opposition or your support of a bill? Is it the night before, or can you do it, if it's an afternoon hearing, can you do it the same day? I haven't had that experience yet. I've been trying to do my stuff a day in advance.
My understanding is you can do it same day. The signing in is open, so long as the public hearing hasn't been gavel closed. So
Okay.
for an afternoon public hearing, you should be able to. Now, having said that, I suspect, I haven't experienced this, but I suspect that practices are different vis-a-vis different committee staffers. But I will double check that for you, but it has been my experience that you can sign in the same day. Having said that, doing it the day before is probably safer. But yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, so we'll continue to monitor changes to quorum requirements, not take any actions, and we will formally weigh in against 1033. And that'll give us a good window tomorrow as to whether this thing has any legs or not. We'll have a sense.
Okay.
Anything else jumping off the page that you hear of? Just want to make sure there's nothing that, I mean, we're monitoring all of these again to kind of cast a broad net, but
I think without, excuse me, without an amendment being presented, the way these are titled, there isn't, but as you said,
right.
it says education. It could end up-
Well, that's what I was worried about. If there was an education bill that could be amended with something that. came from-
Right, okay. Well, then we will report back as part of our update this week. We'll provide a hearing update on 1033 then.
Okay,
Okay.
very good. We can move on to Coalition Communications.
So I thought this might be a good opportunity to share with you my conversation with Tom Rath. You recall when we spoke in December, you had asked for me to reach out to him. He's the co-chair of Reaching Higher, and to see if there might be any common ground worth exploring. And so I've done that. Holidays delayed us a little bit, but he and I did connect shortly after the new year. And so we talked for about half an hour. And I guess I would summarize it as he gave an overview of his history with the organization, which goes back a fair ways. And in his view that early on, he thought there were efforts to have it be a little more partisan. They had retained lobbyists and they took a more active partisan position at the legislature on certain things. He said they've really tried to move away from that. And he said their goal that overarches everything that they do is they really want to be a neutral arbiter of data. They want to be a trusted source of information for legislators on education issues. They're not trying to advocate, in his words, for or against any particular solution or perspective. He said what they really focus on is data collection, and then being a resource for legislators when they have questions about policy aside, how does this actually work in reality? What's the data behind it? And he contrasted themselves with the Josiah Bartlett Center, which he feels provides data, but with a policy objective in mind. He said they've really worked hard to try and get away from the partisanship. And he acknowledged that, the board is probably skewed more in one direction, but from his perspective, their mandate is to be that source of trusted data. And so I explained to him who I was working with and who we were, which of course, given his history, he knows, obviously. And I asked him whether he thought there might be ways that we could explore collaboration, but at least maybe a more fulsome expression of opportunities. And And so he welcomed that. He thought there might be. And he said, to the extent that you're looking for data and information to, help put your perspective, your views into context, then he said there may be. Because I said, this is a nonpartisan organization. And Sean, you made this point about, how everyone's positioned differently politically in terms of a certain issue, but on this issue, you're aligned. So what he suggested, and he's willing to advocate on behalf of his board, would be perhaps a meeting between he and one or two of his members, or maybe a staffer, and a delegation from here, to just kind of talk and kind of have a free exchange of ideas, talk about what they're doing, talk about what we're doing and where we're coming from, and more completely explore that opportunity. He thought it was a great idea. He welcomed it, and should I go back to him and say that we're open to it, I think he would take it to his board and make it happen.
Okay, thoughts?
Never hurts to talk.
Yes. Okay,
It's always good to have another source of data on education. It's just so heavy laden with it. It would be interesting to hear from another group.
Jim, this is Paul. Is Reaching Higher affiliated at all or related to the Hampshire School Funding Fairness Project?
I do not believe they are. No, they're not.
Because there's another bookend organization that has been dealing with this all the way back to the commission days at UNH. So they're another group we should probably explore too.
Now, these are standalone, as I understand it. And so what I can do is, if you'd like, they have their website, but I can provide us, a condensed synopsis.
Mhm.
And then, we can decide if we want who that might be. I'm happy to arrange it, and we can go from there. And I agree, my sense is, if you want additional information and let, not only to gather data, but to let folks know who we are and what we're doing, this isn't a bad meeting to have, and if nothing comes of it, so be it. But he seemed to be fairly enthusiastic to do it. And I think his tenure on there is coming to a close here, maybe this year. So he seemed anxious to help broker this while he's still involved.
Okay.
okay, then why don't you do that and get us the information and we'll.
This is a good time when we have, I'll call it a lull year
Yeah.
in between, to
Exactly.
develop these relationships. Because next year, we'll be doing the budget again and all that. We'll be right back to where we were before.
Exactly.
Then I will reach back out to him and
Okay. Keep moving forward.
And the Funding Fairness Project is led by a guy named Jeff McLynch. He's the project director.
That's my recollection.
So I would reach out to him also, or suggest that.
And the reason is, I think Jim and I had an exchange too. It was interesting. The very last email that group sent, it was the first time I heard a real, and Jim, you can do a better job describing it to me, but it was the first time it really seemed like it was more of a tax reform comment and moving off the property tax. It was just the very last, maybe it was last Friday or the email right before. It just seemed a bit of a change. So maybe there is an opportunity to reach out to them and see, if they've had sort of a rethink on, how to approach the school funding issue.
yeah, it was, I'm looking, Jane, it was last Thursday.
Yeah,
Yeah, and you're right, without reading too much into it,
right.
it was interesting. It gave at least a sense of perhaps opening different perspectives on where they might want to go. And, realistically, for some time now that there's been some stagnation on efforts to change the tax structure and do something different. So we can certainly reach out to them as well. I mean, they seem to have more of I don't want to say partisan perspective, but they're more issue focused than just data focused. So that would be a different conversation, but I'll reach out to Tom and I'll set something up. And I don't know who from our group would want to take part in that, but
Anybody want to participate?
I want to help. I think we need to be careful too, because obviously these other groups have their own objectives and they may not necessarily be aligned with ours, depending upon what they are. This one's obviously they're more data focused. They just bring in the numbers. Some of the others,
Yes, right.
we're just going to be cautious about that when we walk into those meetings.
It's pretty broad when you use the word fairness.
Yeah.
It's different from everyone else.
Right.
And that also, depending on who the representative is, might, as you stated before, Sean, in a bad spot, because it may be a community that could possibly align with 80 to 90% of what the group does, except what we're doing here. And I think the one thing we have to avoid is any fractures in our very narrow specific
Right.
charter.
Absolutely. And that's why I think it's a good idea to keep it below the quorum level, obviously.
Mhm.
Just get some information.
Yep.
Start the discussion, and then if we want to continue, then we can bring it to a board meeting. And,
Right.
Mhm.
you know, have a joint board meeting with that, you know, so that they're meeting all of the requirements. I'd be willing to participate with Sean. if that Work. If everyone's okay with that. Do you want to participate? Tim?
No, that's fine.
Right. Joy, you okay with doing that?
I am.
So we'll go.
I think the exploratory is the important part, not that
Yeah.
we're going to make any type of commitment.
Yep,
Right.
And that was very clearly, just so you're aware, that's how I presented it as well. Is just to, I think, compare notes and better understand what each group is all about. And just whether there are any overlap and areas of cooperation. And I think that's the spirit in which he took it, and I'll certainly reconvey that.
okay.
Okay.
So Paul, to your point about the other group, so, and this goes to Jane's email with the updates about the bus tour they're doing. So they have, they met in Newport last week. There was no news coverage coming from it, so no, except for their social media feed. They're in Nashville on Wednesday doing a similar meeting, and we're gonna cover that. So I'll be able to kind of, I think, share back some insight on how they're presenting their positioning, and I think we'll be able to at least glean from that some sense of how fruitful of outreach might be. But we'll definitely get some intel on that.
The other thing we need to think about too is obviously we have a gubernatorial race that's coming up. And I don't know where Governor Sanders stands in this issue. I don't think it's ever gotten to him at this point. And it sounds like maybe Sherman's going to be the opposition. It'd be good to know where they're at. Sometimes they'll go to meetings like this. I know they came to NHMA, of course, that's a bigger organization than we are. But it would be nice to know where they might stand on these issues. Once it's announced, of course.
Well, it's something, sorry, we've got some folks in the hallway here. Something that we mentioned, I think, at the last meeting, and it's still a little bit early for this, but I definitely want to, I think, commend to the board would be, we're in an election cycle. It is not uncommon for whether they're legislators running for election or new candidates for office to receive an issue survey, asking, explaining what the organization is and asking for their positioning on a couple of key issues. So I would certainly think we could do that. The governor will be less likely to respond to a survey like that, but there are other ways we can get that information.
Yeah.
Senator Sherman very well may. But I think it'd be also useful for us as we go into 2023 for all the House and Senate members, be they
Yes.
incumbents, be they challengers, where they are. And so we can kind of go in with a little bit of a data set of where folks are and the issues we care about. So we'll work on crafting that in the next month or two for your review. But I would like to do something like that if you're willing to do so.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would love to have their replies in writing. So
That's all I have on the communication front.
Jim just stepped out, so I'm just covering for him here. We have other business. Any other business to come before this body? Okay. There's none.
Are we going to be discussing the budget or the finances that Mark sent out earlier?
Okay. Has everybody had a chance to look over the financial report? It's been submitted, it's been sent out.
I do have a question about payments to Bernstein Shore.
Okay.
Yeah, it seems incredible that we haven't paid them in 6 months.
So Jane and I have figured that out. So. a little bit
We
of a
figured it
snap-
out.
No, it's
We're
all
very
good.
sorry about that.
A little bit of a snafu that we
Yeah.
untangled at the end of last week, so
Yeah. Should be
that
good.
should be all set going forward.
I guess the question is, well, of course, the balance sheet, it did look rather healthy, but it's not gonna be as healthy. Not quite.
That's right.
Once the bills are paid, whether or not we're gonna do an assessment for 2022.
We should.
Yeah,
This issue is not, it might be calm this year. Next few years, as more pressure comes up on costs, they all look around and figure a way to turn around and shift things. So I don't think it makes sense for us to turn around and not have enough funding to turn around and adequately address some of these things.
It's a good time to build a war chest.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, we've got people's attention.
Okay, and so that was one of the questions that I had, what should we do? And then the other thing, I just, did you answer, have we paid since July?
No, but it's all, as I just mentioned, right when you stepped out, we had a little bit of a billing snafu that
Okay.
Jane and I figured out last week, so
Okay,
that'll be brought current, I think, shortly.
okay.
So, yes,
Any idea how much of the 107 is?
I
that
think-
is roughly,
the invoice between our work and then there's the website design.
website.
It's like, I think it's just over $23,000, Jane. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
I was quite excited when I saw this. I thought, oh
Yeah, I
my
was
goodness.
too.
sorry about
I
that.
thought we were gonna be able to take a 1-year hiatus.
Yeah.
But I'm in agreement, we should continue to build it up, and
Yeah.
we have provisions for returning it anyway, so. I think that we can do that if we need to.
Well, the question is, if we're gonna do it, what's the methodology we're gonna use? We're gonna use the same methodology. When's that bill gonna be sent out? Those sorts of mechanics.
Well, when did we send the other bill? We sent it in September, October timeframe, right?
Mhm.
So I would say the same
that-
thing and utilize the same budget. I mean,
But I was going to say that was because we had organizational issues. I think it's envisioned, if I remember the agreement correctly, April is the assessment period right after town meeting.
okay,
And we'd have to communicate what that assessment is prior to that. And it's the distribution of the assessment is always based on the equalized values as of January. I haven't checked DRA site to see if they've got the most recent values up yet. But I can certainly, revise the spreadsheet. I just need to know what the budget is in order to create an assessment.
Yeah, I recall there was like a delay, right? We had some trouble creating ourselves. There's just some
Right,
time because we
right.
had so many moving parts.
Yeah, yeah.
But the original agreement did contemplate a reassessment for the second year, if I'm correct.
well, I
That's
don't
how-
see.
Right.
Go ahead, Joy.
I was just gonna say, that is how I remembered it, that we set up to, to pay for 1 year, but that it was a second year was planned and, we were supposed to continue.
Does anybody see any reason to change? I mean, obviously, the apportionment will change based on the valuations, but does anybody see a need to change the bottom line of the budget at this
Well,
point?
there was a need to do so because the first year budget included the fixed cost of the website
Okay,
and other things. I'm trying to find the spreadsheet.
so why don't we do this, Paul? If you want to update that, take out the one-time costs. Prepare a document that we can look at and we'll make it an agenda item for the next meeting. And that will give us time so that we can communicate with the city of Portsmouth's finance office and get the bills generated for whatever the agreement says, April or whenever. Does that make
Well,
sense?
do we have the authority to do that? Does it require a full membership meeting?
Did the membership adopt the budget?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, so we would need a full membership meeting then. But I think we should look at the budget first, and then we'll have a meeting maybe. So we would have a meeting in February, have a full membership meeting, plan for a full membership meeting in March,
Mhm.
and then pass the budget at that time. Is that okay?
Yeah, we'll present a budget to them.
Yeah.
To be heard in March.
I wouldn't necessarily be too concerned about taking out anything from this, maybe redirect it to other sources, because this is not gonna go away. And I think you're gonna find that towns to the south of us, to south of Concord, are gonna pressure, and they have more votes. And let's be honest, this is gonna turn around and, you know, you're gonna need to have a better way of trying to deal with this. I don't think we wanna, shortchange it. So even if we just keep it level funded and move the funds into another area, we know that this could very well, we can always refund the monies and so on. And none of this is earth shaking in terms of cost thus far.
Okay, well, let's let Paul identify the lines that were the one time, and then we can discuss whether or not to reassess those or realign those to other uses. I also,
Unfortunately, I found the spreadsheet, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, yeah, there are one-time expenses that we can back out. But we'd also only budgeted for a partial year last year, so a full year's worth of services actually increases the budget to about
Okay.
70,200.
okay. And
And
that's
I
from
can
what,
send I can send this
66?
around again to everyone to start,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
filling it
that's up about $4,000 or so, right? We were around 65, 66, weren't we?
66.4 was last year's budget.
Yeah, so. Okay, we'll take a look at that, make it an agenda item for the February meeting, and then we'll go from there. And March will actually be a good time to update everyone
I think so.
on the status of bills and things like that.
Yeah, I think by the time of the March meeting, we'll be approaching crossover, not quite there, but there'll been a lot of hearing activity. We'll have a sense of where things stand. Yes, agreed.
Okay. Can
But
we
what-
also,
but many towns have difficulties because they haven't budgeted for this assessment, because we haven't communicated it to them.
Well, it's kind of late now. The deliberative sessions are coming up here. Their warrants are already generated. Their budget should already be generated for the most part.
Well, early town meeting,
or-
we have our February 7th is our budget hearing.
and ours is February 9th.
Yeah, so they're all, and I know like the towns around me are the same way. So,
But again, there wasn't really any community that would be in that boat that had a huge assessment. So I think most of the communities can do it. They have a legal line or they have something like that. So I know that's where we're taking it out of.
Yeah.
So I don't think that it's gonna be a burden waiting until April. to send those bills. I mean, we could send a reminder out, we know that you have town meeting coming up and this was a 2-year plan. And if anybody had any questions, they could contact me. I'd be willing to talk to them about it.
Some of the towns had funds sitting in the account prior to us reforming. And therefore, who still has any money left to apply this time, or has all of it been used?
I'll work with Judy and
Yeah.
make sure that we account for those as well.
Yeah. That I believe that those monies weren't all just poured in to the budget. I believe that money, I don't.
There is still a balance from CC 1.0. So,
Right.
Okay.
yes.
I just figured we better know what monies are there and what is still
Yep.
ready.
All right, I made a note to ask. Okay, I'll ask for that when they give us the December financials.
Okay.
And I think also another good thing to look at the February meeting is the agreement itself to get the timeline for the rest of 2022 out there. We will need another reorganizational meeting and all of that. As much as I'm enjoying the chairmanship. So, any other business? Hearing none, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, I got a motion and a second. All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Joy is an aye. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. And, oh, sorry, February meeting date.
Yes, that is, so it's in a prior email I sent around to everybody. We tried to.
The 17th.
Correct.
17th.
Should be a Monday. No, actually, no, wait a minute. Is
That
Monday?
one's the one that's a Thursday.
That's right. You're right. Yes, sorry. 17th, correct.
The two.
That's
Yep.
what I have.
Location to be determined. So when BEA is available, I'll grab that. There's a small cost for using this room. It is, I mean, the AV is nice, I will say.
Yeah.
But as soon as I can get that figured out, I'll let everybody know.
Okay, very good. All right, thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you,
Thanks.
everyone.
Thank you so much.